Hello everyone. In this tutorial I will share with you my tips on how to draw traditional landscapes in Clip Studio Paint. First is the idea of the landscape. What do you want to draw? What's the time of the day? What's the weather? What are the elements in my illustration? Where to place these elements to form a harmonious or a captivating landscape? Placing the elements. Composition. First question. Which part takes the most of my landscape? The field or the sky? The horizon line. The horizon line is what represents the eye level. A low horizon line gives more space for the sky. It is more suited for drawing dramatic skies with big clouds, storms, or sunsets. A high horizon line gives more space for the ground, best suited for fields, forests, and anything ground-based. A middle horizon line gives an equal space for the sky and the ground, which can create a harmonious, stable scene. After you have decided where to place your horizon line, where exactly do you want the viewer's attention on your painting? Do you want the viewer to focus on the tree, the house, the flowers? The answer to this question will decide your focal point. The focal point is the element or the area in the painting where you want the viewer to pay most attention to. Let's see some of the most used compositions when drawing landscapes. The golden ration. The focal point is placed inside the mini box. This composition shape is available everywhere online, and it is very famous because it works in most illustrations and cinematography, thus the name golden ratio, the rule of thirds. You divide the canvas into 3 equal parts horizontally and vertically, and the focal point can be placed in any of the 4 intersections. Here, I placed my focal point on the lower intersection. Frame composition. Basically, you draw an element or some element that frame your illustration. In this illustration, I made the cherry blossom tree, and the dappled light surround my main element, which is the flower shop. Composition by value. The eye will naturally be drawn to highest point of contrast, so if you make your focal point in a different value, it will naturally stand out. Whereas if all values are pretty close in range, the focal point won't stand out among other elements. You can combine compositions to create one illustration, as I have used both the frame composition and the value composition in my flower shop illustration. I made the cherry tree and the dappled light in a light value, whereas the flower shop is in the shadow, darker value. Another thing that helps guide the viewer to the focal point is the direction of other elements. In this following illustration, I used everything, from the paper airplanes to the shape of the ground, to guide the viewer to the remains of the plane. The side clouds are also pointing to the remains, the plane, focal point, to keep the eye on the illustration. Painting with shapes. In traditional art, especially if you're a beginner, it is much easier to paint when you focus on shapes, big, readable shapes, rather than details. For example, let's not bother with the leaves of the tree and where the light hits every leaf. Rather, let's draw the main shape of the tree and then separate the light area and the shadow area. And then proceed to add some details, but not small details like leaves. The brain automatically picks up on the idea from the overall shape as long as it's clear and readable for what it's meant to be. If your eyes aren't trained to see big shapes, squint your eyes or blur the image, Gaussian blur. Filter. Blur, Gaussian. Blur, adjust strength. Things to avoid. In traditional painting, 1. Don't use soft brush, airbrush. It creates plastic gradient, often very hard to achieve with traditional art tools. It removes texture and it looks sprayed, not painted. Like this sky. Instead, use textured brushes. Don't paint in one brush stroke. Use different brushes and pick your colors manually. Don't just repeat the same colors on canvas. 2. Don't blend everything. It kills texture, and we're back to soft plastic digital look, and it also disturbs the shapes when you overblend equals can't distinguish the edge between light and shadow. Instead, layer strokes, let colors sit next to each other, blend once, then stop, and use texture blender. If you can't see the brush strokes anymore, you overdid it. 3. Don't use saturated colors. It is very often hard to get a glow with traditional media, so it's best to stick to normal toned colors and also not use the blending mode, add glow, or color dodge. 4. Don't zoom in. It compels you to focus on needless details. Instead, keep the canvas full and zoomed out to focus on big shapes. 5. Don't make all edges sharp. If everything is crisp and defined, it looks very digital, so don't use the lasso tool, and if you do, paint over it to erase the clean-cut edge with natural brush strokes. 6. Don't clean up too much. Over-polishing equals digital. Allow room for mistakes, for they can sometimes add a beautiful natural look. 7. Don't render everything equally. This means that you want every element to get the same attention, whereas you should to put more detail on the focal point. 8. Study from real painting. This is the real secret to achieving the traditional look with digital media. Painting a watercolor landscape. To create traditional-looking illustrations in Clip Studio Paint, it is very essential to use paper texture. It helps reinforce the watercolor paper and final look. I set the layer mode to multiply because it allows the layers beneath to show and make the colors more toned than saturated. I set the opacity to 70 to 85% to tone down on the texture. I don't want it too dark. After I set the texture, I created a new layer below the texture layer and filled it with a toned yellow color for a more natural look, especially for the clouds later on. I made a loose sketch using the sketch pencil. I used the flat watercolor brush to fill the sky in one continuous stroke. The eye started building layers for more opacity and saturation of color. While doing so, I made sure to shape the clouds with watercolor edges on top, the fluff, but not the base because I will blend it over later. Then I used the water blender to blend while keeping some areas with watercolor edge to keep a realistic watercolor look. I turned off the sky layer and started working on the ground. I used the wet blot brush to fill the bushes, making use of the water effect to make some areas light like a real watercolor painting. Then I switched back to the flat watercolor brush to build layers and create more depth and shadow. I blended with the water blender, but I didn't remove all watercolor edges to, again, keep a realistic watercolor effect. I did the same for the ground, field, tree, and mountains. Then I simply removed the sketch and added some paint when it was too light. And that's the final results. The brushes I used are the default watercolor brush, flat watercolor brush. It has an embedded watercolor texture that helps sell the traditional look, watercolor edges, and it can create shapes with one continuous stroke and create value when using layering brush strokes. You can find it in the sub-toolbar in Watercolor Brushes tab. Wet blotting ink. This brush has a great watercolor feature, which is the more you pass over the painted area with this brush, the lighter it gets thanks to the water effect, so basically it works like a real watercolor brush. Water blender. This blender helps spread the paint without looking too smooth. I mainly used it to remove some watercolor edges when drawing, because too much watercolor edge makes the painting rather messy, plein air, with digital oils. I used a real canvas texture to emphasize the traditional oil painting look, same as before, drag and drop, set to multiply and lower opacity. In your sketch, you just want to capture the big shapes. The sketch serves as guidelines, so no details in the beginning of the process. This not only helps as guidelines, but also leaves room for artistic interpretation. Sometimes along the process, you might want to move things around, change details, or alter shapes, so keep it loose. I used the color red/orange for the sketch because I won't delete it later on. I will blend it with the paint. I filled in the values in orange since it will serve as an underpainting, sets the tone of the painting, and creates a unique color when overlaying colors on top. Due to atmospheric perspective, the further the object is, the lighter the value, which is why the front bushes have a darker value than the ones in the back, despite have the same color in real life. I filled the shapes using thick oil paint brush. As you can see, I left some spots where the underpainting shows. This will be useful later when blend the colors. I made several small strokes while painting, just like in real-life oil painting, and not a singular big stroke. This also helps create different hues of the same color, just like real oil paint. I blended with the default Painterly blender, PS. All of this is in one layer. Either draw in one layer from the beginning or merge it. Except the canvas texture, keep it separate so that you don't lose texture when you blend. I added depth, light/shadow. With the super dry oil, this brush creates clear, distinct brush marks that help with the idea of traditional painting. I blended again. Bit this time, not everything, just enough to soften some hard edges and brush marks as well as bring the bushes to their final form. I added more brush strokes with the dry oil. Some random strokes on the grass. I didn't draw every single one, just here and there, and the brain will pick up on it. And that was it. This is a simple, plain air painting, so it focuses more on the big shapes, the overall painting without much details. I resized the painting to make it smaller, erased the edges, and blended them again to make it look more loose and natural. Easily painted look. If you felt that the video was too fast for you, you might want to check out the written article for this tutorial. It has assets links, screenshots, and a more in-depth explanation. So I hoped this was useful and that you learned something new. Thanks for watching.